There's a lot of how-to videos and explanations about how thermal foggers work on the web, but here's a bit of a brief rundown on this particular machine. It's a TF35 from Igeba. It contains a solution tank here on the side, just under 6 litres in size. We've got a fuel tank over here, and the principle is that we have a pulse jet engine which consumes fuel coming from the fuel tank through a injection system here, and air is drawn through a disc in the back, and a combustion reaction occurs that creates a lot of hot air, and that hot air makes its way down the fog tube, and somewhere along this fog tube we introduce our solution that we want to fog out into a warehouse, for instance. In this particular case we've got it configured for water-based application. And what's the difference between water-based and oil-based? Really, for most machines, it's where we introduce the liquid into this fog tube. With water-based applications, we're generally introducing them late or towards the end of the fog tube so that we don't evaporate them off at a much higher temperature. So as we move along this fog tube, the temperature is high at the back end and it gets cooler and cooler. Surprisingly, it drops quite a lot over short distances inside the fog tube. With an oil-based formulation, we bring it back further into the fog tube. Generally, it's somewhere in this sort of region for this machine, and that allows it to vaporise the solvent-based chemistry. So this particular machine came with a tube for oil or solvent-based formulations, and to convert to a water-based formulation, we put a new tube in. The water-based tube also has a flare at the end to assist with the product exiting the fog tube, and we also changed the nozzle or the orifice or size of that nozzle to allow the water-based product to move through at a different rate to what we need for an oil-based product. So let's go back and have a look at a bit more of the mechanics of it. We have, generally with most of these machines, we have a starting procedure and we have a procedure to turn the liquid on and make the fog. Most of that starting procedure is at the back end of a thermal fogger. We make sure we got fuel, we make sure we got our solution mixed up. We switch on the fuel, in this case it's pulling it up, and then we have a starter. This machine contains 4 D-cell batteries that run the starter. It's a bit like your electric barbecue starter. You press the button in, and we also introduce more oxygen into the chamber to help start that reaction. So normally we're slowly pumping this and pressing the starter at the same time until we get ignition. One thing we need to take into consideration, particularly with solvent-based formulations, is we need to make sure that we don't get the flame too far out of the tube. So we adjust that by changing down here at the back of the machine the mixture screw. So the more we turn that in the clockwise direction, the less fuel goes through the pulse jet engine and the flame comes back further in the fog tube. If we turn it in the anti-clockwise direction, we get more fuel into the system and the flame comes further out. So those that have used this type of machine before know what happens when you get a flame out here. You start to get what's called a flame out and a bit of a bang, and it gives you a bit of a fright. So we're trying to keep the flame back into the fog tube, but not too far back. Once this machine's running and we're happy with its operation, we can then decide to turn on the liquid solution line. In this case, we have 3 positions. We're currently in the off position. We move it past the second, which is called the flushing, and we go down to the on position. So now in that position we are fogging and liquid is running down the line and being introduced into the fog tube. To turn this fogger off, the first thing we need to do is to make sure we vent out the line. So we put it into this middle position, and that runs all the liquid out of the lines, and then we move it back to the off position. We now have no solution running down the line. We have to turn the machine off, and we do that by cutting the fuel supply off. So we push down the button, the machine will shut down, and we've got 2 final steps to do to make this machine shut down properly. And those are, we need to exhaust the rest of the fuel, and we do that by trying to start it with the fuel off, and that'll exhaust the rest of the fuel in the system. And finally, we release the pressure out of our solution tank. So when the machine's running, it pressurizes this solution tank, and that's how the liquid gets itself to the front end of the fog tube and makes this whole system work. So if we want to think about how we're going to calibrate a fogger, we need to do something that we've done with all the other machines, and that is we have to have it running. But before we do start it, we'd come down and we'll disconnect the fluid line and the bush containing the fluid nozzle off the fog tube, and we'd put that into our jug.